So, hi everybody, and welcome back to Minka Guides. This month, we're talking about one of the most common questions I'm asked: where are all the polyamorous people over the age of 40? And I'm so delighted to have the dating and relationship coach and renowned conversion researcher, Dr. Marie Thouin, here with us today. Welcome, Marie.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Minka.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad to have you here. Why don't you introduce yourself to everybody so they know a little bit more about you?
Absolutely. I am a dating and relationship coach, and I help folks who are anywhere on the monogamy to non monogamy spectrum, any backgrounds. I love to just help people create an intentional and vibrant love life. And I also have been studying compersion for many years now, starting with my PhD that I published in 2021, and now having done a lot more work for a book that will be coming out in 2024. So, for people who don't
How
know,
exciting!
compersion, yes, it's basically empathic joy in consensually non monogamous relationships. So, I'm super excited to be bringing more attention on that concept.
Absolutely, absolutely. Especially because it's one of those concepts that we usually only talk about within the polyamorous community. So it's really such a wonderful thing to be having it out there as a book so people beyond the community can begin to understand and appreciate it.
Yeah, exactly.
So speaking of the polyamorous community, yeah, like it's really interesting that quite often I receive messages on Instagram from people who are in their 40s and 50s and sometimes even 60s, just being like, "Yay, great that that there's more and more polyamorous people, but really, where are the people our age?" And they often find themselves struggling to find people to date, even within their own age gap bracket. So I wondered if you knew of some of the reasons why it could seem like there are fewer polyam people who are aged 40 plus.
Right. And there's good news and bad news. I would say that the good news is that there's actually not a statistical gap in terms of who is polyamorous and who is not in terms of age. If you take a sample of
It's
polyamorous
great.
people and a sample of monogamous people, they're equally distributed across ages. So it's not that there aren't non-monogamous people over
Okay.
40. It's just that they might be a little bit
Hmm.
harder to find, and that's, I think,
Exactly.
because it's a little bit harder to be out when you have more to lose. Sometimes people, I think, in their 40s and above, they might have bigger jobs and they might have children and they might have, reputations to maintain. And there's just a little bit less acceptance in our society so far,
Hmm.
for those age groups to be out and public in their identity as non-monogamous, versus, I think, people who are in their 20s and early 30s. There's just more now of a broad acceptance, and that goes along acceptance of different sexual identities like gender diversity and sexual orientation diversity, which is a really good thing, and it's more and more accepted for all age groups. But of course, younger age groups have more of a fluidity in being out, and they might have less to lose. So then the
Yes.
question is, how do you find those folks who might not be so public about their identity? And I
Yes.
always recommend, having kind of a broad range of ways that you can meet new people. Of course, online, there's a lot of different apps that cater to non monogamy, and some allow different levels of privacy, which is great. So, OkCupid and Field are some of my favorites, and they do allow you to go incognito if you don't want to be discovered by everyone or anyone. You can be only discovered by people who are also non monogamous, so that, it provides a layer of privacy there. And then there's, of course,
Mm.
polyamory meetups and online communities that are really great for that. So,
Yes.
yeah,
And I think
people
that's
are
a really
out
good
there.
point. Yeah, no, absolutely. Because I think that's a really good point. Because I think a lot of the time when people start first looking for partners, the natural idea is these days to go to dating apps. And if you do go onto a dating app and then you search for people within a few years of yourself and it comes up with like two or three people, then it can be very discouraging, to
Hmm.
do that.
Hmm.
But then I think that's one of the things, is that realizing that a lot of people, like, I'm going to be 43 soon. I only started using dating apps in the last couple of years because I'd been in long-term monogamous relationships. And I think people even older are probably maybe not as accustomed to seeing that as a a way of dating, or their natural first place to go to look. So I think you're right. Like, events is a great idea for meeting other people within your community or in an online community.
Absolutely. And of course, geography has a lot to do with that. But I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I can personally testify that the non monogamous community here is very diverse in all
Yeah,
aspects of identity, including age. If you go to a polyamory meetup in the Bay Area, in my experience, there are going to be people from their 20s to their 60s, 70s, and even sometimes 80s.
amazing, amazing. Yeah, exactly. And I think sometimes the events are really good for that because they help you to realize that there are people out there of the same age group, but also some of those people might not be looking for new partners. They might be going to those events, but not necessarily looking for new people, because it's understandable that people of a certain age might already be quite partnered up, So I think that's also
Hmm.
something
Hmm.
that could be a factor in trying to find other people, within your age bracket as well. So people's lives are a
Yeah.
lot more established in a sense. So that could also be affecting it as
Hmm.
well.
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
Exactly.
yeah, like some people might not have the bandwidth. And the flip
Oh,
side
of
of that,
course.
though, is there's also a lot of people who have been in monogamous marriages, and divorce or become widowed and realize that they don't really want or need monogamy anymore. And I've heard a lot of
Mm-hmm.
stories from folks, in their 40s and up who have really gone through that identity transition and realizing, I don't think monogamy is for me, or at least not for me right now, and are exploring
Exactly.
non-monogamy in increasing numbers.
Yes, which I think is why it's like there's that element of reasons to be hopeful. I think there's, like, in part that you're saying statistically, even though it might feel like there aren't people around that are of your age group, they are statistically there. And then also that, like, that society is changing and people are changing and social acceptance is changing. And so gradually, we might see more and more people kind of being open about their love style, perhaps. Do you think there's
Right.
other reasons to be hopeful at all? Does anything else spring to mind?
Yeah, I think that there is a lot to gain for people in higher age groups to be non-monogamous. And I just did some original research on that for my book, actually, The Intersection of Compersion and Age. And it's
Oh,
so
wow.
exciting because really it seems to be that there is a positive correlation. And that would be for two
Oh,
reasons.
wow.
One is that for people who are aging, like I actually interviewed Kathy Labriola, who is an expert on polyamory and aging. She wrote a whole book called Polyamorous Elders. And she
Yeah.
explained to me how oftentimes when people are older, they need more care, they need more community, they need more people to rely on. And then it becomes so fantastic to have a community of metamors and lovers and have more of these very intimate bonded relationships, so that not
Mm.
if there's a nuclear family and a nuclear couple, one of them needs a lot of care, then the other person becomes a 24/7 caretaker, and that is very, very
Mm-hmm.
difficult. Versus, if
Yes.
there's more people to really be interconnected and take care of each other, then it promotes a lot of compersion, and it just really makes sense. And
Yes.
then the other
Absolutely.
reason
Yeah.
why age and compersion could correlate, and there's so much of a good reason to do it, is that those kind of hot buttons of insecurities of, hey, like, am I pretty enough? Am I handsome enough? Like, that kind of comparison that oftentimes we have in lower ages can start to diminish. As people get older, they might feel a little bit more secure in themselves. and have, like
Mm.
kind of worn down those hot buttons. It's not, of course, a guarantee. People, I think, can carry insecurities for lifetimes, but there is something about older age. I was just actually chatting with some girlfriends of mine yesterday, and they're a little bit older. They're in their 50s, and they were telling me, like, hey, you have a lot to look forward to, in your 40s and 50s, because you start not caring as much what people think, and you're not as insecure about yourself and your body, etc. So that
Mm-hmm.
is a good reason to also consider polyamory, as those
Mm.
insecurities might be less impactful.
Exactly. Well, those are definitely reasons to be hopeful, and also just like very encouraging um, reasons looking towards the second half of life and how polyamory can kind of work actually really well within that stage of life. So, if someone is starting to date, again, and starting to date for the first time polyamorously, and they want to meet people who are within a certain bracket around their age, say, a few years older and a few years younger, what are some, tips or ways that they can have a certain dating strategy to try and find people much more within their own age group?
Hmm. Well, of course, if you're going to be dating online, you can start with setting up your apps for that age group and see who shows up.
Mm-hmm.
And then really visit all of the polyamory or non monogamy communities that you can find in your geographical area. There's no way to really predict who is going to be part of those communities until you visit, until you attend some events, until you see who's there. So there's no
Yes.
magic formula to that. It's just really about doing the footwork of searching who is around, who is there, and not giving up too quickly. Oftentimes people who haven't
Yes.
dated in a long time, they might try for a few weeks and oh my gosh, I don't find anyone. That is not working. And that is
Mm.
way too I mean, we need some patience and we also need to put some value in the process. Because as a dating coach,
Yes.
I always tell people dating is not a waste of time until you find your person or that person that you're looking for. It is a
Mm-hmm.
valuable process of introspection, of inquiry, of creating connection with different kinds of people that you would not normally meet in your everyday life. So try to make that process as valuable as possible so that you don't get discouraged too quickly.
Absolutely. Yes, definitely. And I think there's also value. I think when people start um, being polyamorous, they don't realize as much like how much value there is in having friends who are also approaching life in the same way. So if you start dating and you start going to community events and you don't necessarily meet people that you want to form romantic or sexual bonds with immediately, but you meet other people your own age who are also polyamorous, there is really, really value like how important that is to have people around you like that, because that can be really good for having these kind of conversations and swapping tips and all of that. But also, I've always wanted to have a dinner party where I invite only polyamorous people over the age of 40 and then get them to invite somebody that they know from the community as well, that who's also, as a way of community building, which is a good idea. But then also,
Mm-hmm.
you never know who
Mm-hmm.
you might meet through doing that. So I think there's
Right.
always ways that you can be proactive to try and build that network and community of your own age group as well.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. And that to me is actually the ultimate advice is to become a community hub, to become the kind of person who
Yes.
people are comfortable coming to and introducing other people and yeah, creating a buzz around community. And it's the
Yes.
advice I always give to people who complain like, hey, I don't find the community I like. Like, there's not a community around me that has the kind of characteristics that I would like. The answer is
Mm-hmm.
create it. If you can create it,
Exactly.
if you're not finding it, there's probably a lot of other people who will be very grateful for you creating that. And it doesn't have to cost much money. You can have a potluck
No.
in your house
Yes.
or at a park. It can be so
Yes,
simple.
exactly. Yeah, I 100% agree. And also there's, I suppose there's the flip side to this, is that a lot of people who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s may end up dating people who are, say, quite a bit younger than them. So, say for example, I have a partner who's 9 years younger than me, and that's come about for the fact that I often end up dating that bit younger because, not that I would love to meet people my own age, but I still do find it quite hard. Um, and so, I think it's also part of the conversation is what are some key things to think about when approaching like dating with a large age gap? Like thinking about how different things, your different ages may influence how that relationship goes about.
Yeah. Well, I like to approach it in the same way that I would approach a multicultural relationship where there is a cultural gap, with a
Mm,
lot of curiosity, a lot of openness, letting go of assumptions, and the willingness to communicate a lot. I think sometimes when we
yes,
date someone who is similar to ourselves, whether it's in terms of age or culture, we don't feel like we need to communicate as much because there's a lot of common ground, common understanding, and it's comfortable. It's comfortable to date
yes,
someone who looks like us, or who has the same background in some way. But
of
it,
course.
of course, does not always happen, and it doesn't mean that love will be less exciting or the connection will be less exciting. It's just we need to expand our comfort zone to include someone who has that kind of different background, and asking a lot of questions about who they are, and just really exploring the connection with an open mind. Like, I really don't think there's
Mm,
anything wrong with age gap relationships. In fact, they can be really amazing. I have had some of them, and I know a lot of good friends who have age gap relationships. And I think removing the stigma also from that, there's a lot of
yes.
social judgment, like, oh, especially, um, I think in hetero relationships, for women to date younger men, they can be called a cougar, and there's a lot of judgment.
Mm,
And that is
hmm.
totally misplaced. I mean, oh my gosh, long term friends of mine, have an age gap relationship, like 20 years. The woman is 20 years older, and
Wow.
they've been together for at least 20 years, if not more, and they have an amazing relationship. I mean, Emmanuel Macron, the French president, has an age gap relationship, which I'm so glad that he's helped, I think, normalize that a little bit. And yeah,
Yes,
just having an
exactly,
open mind.
exactly. Yeah. And also, I think that sometimes, I think it's always, as you say, communication is important. I think communicating about expectations is important because
Yeah.
they may differ where people are at different stages in their life. And you may forget that, oh, yeah, like you may be at the point where you want to have children, but your partner might be at a different stage in their life. Or,
Hmm.
other things that may influence that. But then the flip side is that, I'm someone whose life in my 40s doesn't look that different from someone who's in their early 30s because I don't have much commitments. I'm quite freewheeling. I'm not really, focused on anything that people would normally associate with being in your 40s or 50s in terms of like, I don't know, like big career goals or buying a house or anything like that. So for me, my life doesn't necessarily look too dissimilar. My expectations aren't too dissimilar from someone of a different age, but that could be different for you depending on who you are and where you're at, obviously. um,
Right.
and then, I think it's always good just to acknowledge those differences, and particularly if somehow, um, perhaps the person who's older has a higher income, for example. So there might be a
Hmm.
financial difference in the relationship. Um, and then also just acknowledging if that age difference brings in any kind of power imbalances. For example,
Hmm.
say if the older person has a lot more experience with polyamory and or just relationships in general or something like that, that could bring in some sense of a power imbalance in there. So it's always good to kind of be mindful and acknowledge those things. But
Hmm.
also, yeah, like I think that a lot of time once you kind of start learning to navigate that, in that partnership, then you kind of figure those things out pretty quickly as you go along.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. It's all about communication and openness and transparency. Being really transparent about who we are, and also knowing that relationships is not a one size fits all. Like some relationships might be really wonderful for a season and some of them for a lifetime, and some of them are relationships that you want to entangle your life with someone, and some of them might be more like comet relationships where you see each other and you don't really engage in, you're not like family planning and merging finances with that person. And there's so many different shades and shapes of relationships that can be beautiful and valuable and sacred.
Yes. I think that's one of the things that really I love about polyamory is we already automatically talk about expectations anyway. So someone who is rolling up to like a dating somebody and they might be solo polyamorous. So they might already be like, oh, I have no interest in cohabiting or sharing finances. Or you might have somebody who is has been partnered up with a nesting partner for a really long time, owns a house, something like that. So their expectations might differ. So we're already kind of quite used to having those conversations around such things, which means I think that we probably head into age gap relationships with like a little bit more self-awareness and understanding about what we're looking for and how we are looking for people to maybe fit into our lives and stuff like that as well. So, I mean, I
Mhm.
suppose that's one of the benefits of already being so big on communication.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's just like a further process of leaving all the cultural assumptions aside and creating the
Exactly.
life that we really want in an intentional way.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So, do you have any final thoughts or tips or anything that you would want to give to anybody who's watching this and is in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, you know?
Well, I would really emphasize the value of community, because having friends, and even if it's virtual friends who can relate, who can share advice, who can share space with us, is always super important in order to not lose hope, in order to be validated in that kind of counter cultural identity that we're carrying. So even for folks who do not have immediately, close geographically communities available, I would encourage you to go online and to join some CNM, consensually non-monogamous communities. One that I often recommend is the Normalizing Non-Monogamy community, and it's led by my friends Emma and Finn, who have the Normalizing Non-Monogamy podcast. And I know there's a lot more. There's Facebook communities, there's Patreon communities associated with some podcasts, like Multiamory, I believe, has a Patreon community that is a great place for questions to be asked and community to be built. So I would start there and have that as a foundation for not feeling alone. And if you can, also work with a coach, that can be a really big boon. And of course, that's what I do. I help people find creative ways to date and find people and find themselves in the process. I think dating and relationship is always a very internal process as well as an external one. It's very valuable in itself. So just really try to enjoy the process as much as possible, even when frustration arises.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, on that note, Marie, like where can people find you and the work that you do?
Yeah, so I have a couple of different websites. One is all about compersion, and people can find it at whatiscompersion.com. And there's also a tab for my coaching work. And if people are more curious about dating coaching specifically, go to loveinsight-dating.com. And
Amazing.
if you just want one place to connect with me and get all of these things, go to my Instagram, and that's at love_insight_dating. And if this is all too
Wonderful.
confusing, just Google my name, Marie Thouin, and you'll find probably all of this. And I
That's
do
one.
offer a 30-minute free introductory session for anyone who's interested in coaching and wants to meet me, I would love
That,
to connect with folks.
that That's great. And if you're watching this on Instagram, there will be that link across to Marie's Instagram there. If you're watching this on YouTube or on my blog, all of those links will be available either in the show notes or in the link through on the blog. So that's wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation today, Marie. I really, really appreciate it. And I do hope that people out there have found it useful as well.
Thank you. Yes, I'm wishing a lot of wonderful love and success and friendships and goodness to everyone who is watching.
Absolutely. Well, thank you.
Thank you.